This is what the machine looks like from the front. On the side is the electrical cord attachment and the on-off switch. On is all the way up. This is the flywheel that we'll talk about in a minute. You begin by putting the spool of thread here on the thread spool, and the thread itself goes to thread guides, through channels, down under this lever that is a thread tension lever, up through the thread uptake lever. That is governed here by the flywheel. When you turn the flywheel by hand, you'll always want to turn it toward you. Otherwise it messes up the guts of the machine. And that governs the thread uptake lever, which is also connected to the needle moving there. So you'll bring the thread from here, through the channels, through the thread guides, through the thread uptake lever, and there's a small thread guide, tension guide, right there. You want the thread to go right through there. And then the thread comes down here, goes behind this thread guide and into the eye of the needle there. While we're here, let's look at, this is the presser foot, and back here is the presser foot lever that governs the up and down motion there. The presser foot can come off like that and go back on that way. The presser foot also can come off down here, and you change the presser foot to use for various functions. This metal plate with the grooves at 1/8 of an inch increments is called the throat plate. Down here is the door that opens the bobbin housing. Inside the bobbin housing is the bobbin casing that comes out lifting this lever, and that is the actual bobbin itself. So the bobbin goes into the casing, and that unit goes into the housing and gets closed back up. So I mentioned the feed dogs. When this dial is turned over to this icon, what that governs is the feed dogs. I'm going to turn it back to make them engage. These two tracks, this one and this one, those two tracks are the feed dogs. What those act like are tiny little helping hands that move the fabric through the machine, and it's timed to move the fabric through, pause for a moment, then they fall down into the machine while the needle comes down to make its stitch, and then the feed dogs come up, grab fabric, and move it slightly back, while drop out of the way while the needle comes down again to make its next stitch. Those are called the feed dogs. This dial is the tension dial for the upper thread. Generally speaking, we want these two red lines on the dial, the red line on the dial to match up with the red line on the machine. There might be some instances where we loosen or tighten the thread tension on the top, but mostly we want to keep it right there. This is the thread guide you'll use when you're winding a bobbin. The thread will come here, and do you see that that is on a spring? That lower piece of metal is on a spring. The thread goes right through there, and that provides tension on the thread while it's winding. You know what direction to put the thread on there because there's a very small arrow that shows a direction, and that's what you use to wind a bobbin, which I'll talk about in a later video. This section are the dials that govern what the stitches are. Here is the stitch width dial. It's from 0 to 5, and 5 is the widest, 0 is a straight stitch. If you forget that, Here's a small icon showing you a small zigzag going to a wide zigzag. This is an icon that is showing you what the middle bar of this dial does. It changes the needle placement, needle position this way. Watch over here. I'm turning the dial to the left, which changes the position to the left. Coming back, that's centered, and then it goes to the right. Generally speaking, we want to have the needle position in the center, which means this dial would be straight up and down. This second dial is the buttonhole machine. You can see the icon here in the shape of a buttonhole. This is, as a beginning stitcher, you may not use this, but if you do, always remember that you move it clockwise. You never want to move it counterclockwise because that also messes up the guts of the machine. The next dial down is the stitch length indicator. You can see that there are smaller to medium to longer stitches, and then this fish hook, which actually is a U-turn indicator, icon rather, and that indicates all the way up is a back stitch, a U-turn, where you back stitch to lock stitches, and then you can turn this dial to get to number 5, which is the longest stitch, and turn the dial to number 3, which is a medium-sized stitch, and that's where we do most of our stitching. This bottom dial is one also that we usually don't change. Here you can see an icon for a straight stitch and a zigzag stitch. We want this dial pointing at that for the most part. If it's pointing over there, what that does is a different function with the feed dogs, and we generally don't sew with that function. The green and the red on the outer dial is just a way of switching between a different set of stitches up here. Generally speaking, we keep this lever on the green for, again, the icon of the straight stitch and the icon of the zigzag. That's where we do most of our stitching.